debated over, discussed, ultimately a lot of these ideas, of course, put down on paper as well. The original purpose of this room before you, the assembly room of the Pennsylvania State House, was for the legislative branch of the Pennsylvania colonial government, although the Continental Congress would begin utilizing this space during the late spring, specifically the month of May of the year 1775. Now, of course, we're still talking about a little bit more than a year before they would get around to declaring independence, but if you would ask most Americans at this point what exactly it was they were fighting for, what their struggle, what their beef was with the mother country, a likely answer that you would have gotten at this stage was that they were fighting for their rights as Englishmen. So really the whole notion of fighting this conflict for independence was an idea not so popular at the beginning of this conflict, but did become increasingly so as the conflict progressed. And as ideas for independence gathered momentum, they spread quickly enough to the point where a little over a year later, that is by the early summer of 1776, many Americans at this point had in fact come around to embracing independence as the desired outcome. And getting a sense of the way that the winds were blowing here in early June of 1776, it was decided amongst some of the members of the Continental Congress that it might be a good idea to try to get Americans on the same page for really a common understanding of what the struggle was all about. And so to do this, the decision was reached to draft a document, one which could serve as an official statement to let the world know the justification for the cause of independence, so that in the event of independence being declared, this official statement would be ready from the start. Now, to draft the document, Congress is going to appoint from amongst the delegates here a committee of 5 individuals. Serving on this committee of 5 is going to be a young delegate from Virginia over here, whose name I imagine will ring a bell with most of you, Thomas Jefferson. And it is going to largely fall on Thomas Jefferson's shoulders to put together a rough draft of this document, which he's going to complete in about 2.5 weeks' time. Now, the majority of the document that Thomas Jefferson here writes will more or less amount to a bill of grievances. That is a lengthy list of accusations against King George III, then the ruling monarch of Great Britain, for what were generally regarded to be the king's most egregious offenses. But of course, the part of the document that's going to go on to become the best remembered today, certainly the most quoted part anyway, is a part which does not really appear amongst this lengthy list of grievances, but rather, it's the line early on which reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, I think it's probably fair to say that most people would regard this as the most famous line from the Declaration of Independence, certainly the most oft-quoted part anyway. And it usually seems to be the case as well that when people quote from the document, they have a tendency to just really confine it to that one part. Now, this is understandable. Obviously, some very inspiring words there, to say the least. But what comes immediately after, well, this is a very important part of the equation. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. And this might ultimately be the most radical statement being made in the document. Now, it is possible that 200 plus years later we've become somewhat removed from all the implications of a line like that, but do keep in mind that over 200 years ago, the point of reference that people back then had for governments all over the world would have, of course, been monarchies, governments headed by kings, queens, emperors. And this line could really be seen as an assault against what was argued to be the arbitrary authority of monarchy. And the point is further emphasized here that it is in fact the government, that is, of course, you, the people who should be the check on their government as opposed to it being the other way around. I'm sure this is the version of the document that would be most familiar to your eyes, although just so that there is no confusion about what I'm showing you here, this is just a $1.95 copy. There is in fact only one signed version of this document, which is on display in the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. Signed right